ex-wife fought for custody of our daughter, only to abandon her, alone, on my driveway just 9 days later. This is the beginning of my journey to protect my child. It all began with a heartbreaking discovery, the unraveling of my ex-wife's infidelity. Danielle and I had been together for 6 years. It was one of those classic love stories. Work colleagues who found their way into each other's hearts. We both worked at the same company until I was offered a better position elsewhere, allowing us to date more openly. Things became serious fast. We got married, and eventually, our beautiful daughter, Sarah, was born. But then, something happened. It had been years since I'd seen my parents, and with Thanksgiving around the corner, we decided to visit them. Sarah needed to connect with her grandparents, to understand where I came from, to feel the roots that had shaped me. When we arrived, they greeted us with warm smiles, their faces lighting up at the sight of Sarah. It felt good to be back. The dinner was everything we needed: good food, shared stories, and the comfort of familiar voices. It felt like we were making up for lost time. Sarah, growing tired, was ready for bed. I excused myself, taking her upstairs while Danielle stayed with my parents, chatting away. After tucking Sarah in, I noticed the tablet she'd been playing with earlier. I picked it up, intending to kill time while everyone continued talking downstairs. But as I scrolled through the games, a sudden notification popped up, a text message from someone named Chad. The message read, "Missing you already." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. What was this? Why was my 8-year-old daughter receiving messages like this in the middle of the night? A sickening knot twisted in my stomach. As I looked closer, I realized something far more troubling. The tablet was synced with Danielle's iCloud account. She had probably forgotten to log out, leaving her messages open to anyone who might come across them. My mind raced. I opened the Messages app with bated breath, my fingers trembling. What I saw next made my stomach churn. There were a series of messages between Danielle and Chad, graphic, intimate, and so detailed it made my blood run cold. The messages talked about secret meetings, how Danielle had revealed she no longer loved me, blaming my work for our strained relationship. Chad, too, shared how much he enjoyed being our neighbor, how he could visit whenever Sarah and I were out. Their words were so vile, so explicit, I could barely stomach reading them. The realization hit me like a gut punch. I had just discovered Danielle's affair. I quickly started taking photos of the messages on my phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I didn't want Danielle to find out. Not yet. I couldn't let her know I had uncovered her betrayal. My mind swirled with questions. Why? How could she do this? I couldn't let Sarah accidentally come across this on the tablet either. She might be young, but she wasn't stupid. I wiped the tablet clean and unsynced it, knowing Danielle's phone would hold more evidence. The night was long, sleepless, as I wrestled with the truth. The next day, as Sarah was out with my parents, I decided I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. It was time to confront Danielle. I needed answers, and she had no way out this time. I laid it all out in front of her. The messages, the proof. At first, she refused, denying everything, as if I hadn't seen the undeniable truth. But once I showed her the photos I had taken, the tears started flowing. She crumbled before me, her sobs filled with guilt and regret. She admitted everything. "I needed you," she said, her voice barely audible, but my work schedule, it pushed me away. I asked the question I dreaded hearing the answer to. How long had this been going on? Her response hit me like a punch to the gut. "A year," she whispered, her voice shaking. "A year of betrayal. A year of lies, while I worked tirelessly to provide for our family." The shock, the disgust, it was overwhelming. I had suspected something, but to hear it confirmed in such plain, harsh words made it real. The trust we had built over the years? Gone. Shattered in an instant. I couldn't stop the tears that fell. My heart ached, broken in ways I never imagined possible. Danielle continued to cry, trying to explain, trying to justify herself. But there were no excuses. Every word she said sounded hollow. The fight between us intensified with every painful revelation. Just then, my parents returned from brunch with Sarah. They saw the storm on our faces, the turmoil. Concern washed over their expressions. My dad, sensing the tension, quickly took Sarah upstairs to her room. Alone with my mom, I poured out the truth I never wanted to speak aloud. Mom's face shifted from confusion to disbelief, and then to something darker, disappointment. Danielle, still crying, continued her defense. She spoke of how my demanding work schedule had driven her into Chad's arms, how he had become her emotional support. She regretted it, she said, but only now. She wished things had been different, but I had failed her, according to her. My mom, her face turning red with anger, couldn't hold back anymore. She looked at Danielle, unwavering, and with a heavy heart, told her to leave. The words were final. As Danielle gathered her things, a deep silence filled the room. The door closed behind her, and the weight of the moment pressed down on me. In that quiet, I was left with nothing but my thoughts, the overwhelming pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak. And as I sat there, I couldn't help but wonder how things had gone so terribly wrong. The days that followed were unbearable, each one heavier than the last, as I struggled to process the revelation that had shattered everything. My mom, who had witnessed the raw turmoil firsthand, quickly filled my dad in on the shocking details. His reaction mirrored hers, a mix of disbelief, shock, and profound hurt. The betrayal, it seemed, cut deep not just for me, but for my parents as well, who had welcomed Danielle into our family with open arms. Sarah, our sweet, innocent 8-year-old, kept asking where her mom was. Every time she asked, the pain in her eyes twisted my heart. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. Not yet. Not when she was too young to understand the depths of the mess that had been created. Instead, I lied, telling her that Danielle had to leave suddenly due to work commitments. I could see the confusion and hurt in her eyes, and every time she asked about her mom, it felt like a stab to my soul. But I had to protect her, keep her from the truth for as long as I could. The next few days blurred into a haze of emotions, a mix of grief, anger, and disbelief. My parents were there, offering the support I so desperately needed. They didn't know how to fix it, but they were there, providing comfort while we tried to process what had happened, what had been lost. Returning home was like stepping into a house that no longer felt like home. What was supposed to be a joyful reunion for the holidays now felt poisoned by the lingering shadows of deceit. We tried, desperately, to salvage the spirit of the season, but each moment felt suffocating. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the knowledge that everything had changed, that the foundation we had built had been ripped apart. And then came the day I had been dreading. The day I had to face reality. The day I had to walk back into the very house that had been violated, where the trust had been shattered, and where the woman I had loved had betrayed me in the most painful way possible. I was furious. Furious that I had to step foot in that house knowing what had happened there. I knew our marriage was over. There was no going back. I needed Danielle to know that. She had to leave, and she had to leave now. When we returned home, she was waiting. She looked at us with those eyes, eyes that were full of guilt and regret. An apology hung on her lips, but it was too late for apologies. Sarah, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just torn through our lives, ran to Danielle and threw herself into her arms. She embraced her, as if nothing had changed. It was gut-wrenching to watch. The innocence of a child clashing with the wreckage of a broken marriage. I knew we needed to talk. We retreated to a private space, away from Sarah's innocent gaze. Danielle started her apologies again. Her words were drenched in remorse, promises of change hanging between us like fragile threads. She claimed she had cut off all contact with Chad, and I couldn't help but scoff. Cut him off? He was our neighbor. How could she possibly sever all ties with him? I couldn't keep the bitterness from creeping into my voice as I confronted her with the obvious. She looked at me, confusion clouding her face, as if she couldn't understand why I was so upset. I wasn't interested in her confusion. I wasn't interested in any more lies. I looked her dead in the eye and told her it was too late for apologies. No matter what she said or did, it was over. The shock in her eyes deepened as my words sank in. You cut off contact with Chad? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Really? He lives next door. You can't avoid him, even if you wanted to. She stammered, trying to explain herself, but my patience had worn thin. The lies, the deception. It was all too much. It's too late. I'm divorcing you, I said, each word sharp, final, and unyielding. Her eyes widened in disbelief, but there was nothing she could say. The truth had caught up with her. The consequences of her actions were now unavoidable. She tried to plead, to make amends, but my decision was resolute. I had been through enough. The damage was done, and the only way forward was to cut the ties that had once bound us. A cold silence filled the space between us, the weight of my words settling like a heavy, suffocating fog. Danielle did eventually move out. I filed for divorce, and the process dragged on for what felt like forever. Thankfully, we had signed a prenup, so Danielle couldn't demand anything from me, especially after the affair had destroyed everything. But amidst the legal battles, we reluctantly agreed on a 50-50 custody arrangement for the sake of our daughter. I complied with the child support, hoping it would provide Sarah with the stability she deserved, despite the wreckage of our marriage. Danielle moved back to her parents' place, and I tried, for Sarah's sake, to maintain a decent relationship with them. The weeks passed, divided between Sarah's time with me and her time with Danielle. The goal was simple: ensure that our daughter felt loved, no matter what. But as time went on, I began to notice something disturbing. Whenever Sarah was with me, she would be wearing old clothes. Clothes that didn't match the new ones I knew she had in her closet. It puzzled me. Why wasn't she wearing the nice things I had bought her? I asked Danielle about it, and she brushed it off, claiming that Sarah was saving the new clothes for special occasions. I was confused, but decided not to push it. Parenting was hard enough without adding unnecessary tension, and I didn't want to upset Sarah. But the questions kept nagging at me. Something wasn't right. My ex-wife was neglecting our daughter's basic needs, refusing to let her enjoy the little luxuries every child deserves. And as much as I tried to create special moments with Sarah, taking her out, making memories, it felt like I was fighting an uphill battle. Then, just last month, the unimaginable happened. I was driving home from work when I saw Sarah standing alone in the driveway. My heart sank. I rushed out of the car, my mind racing with worry. What had happened? Why was she alone? I asked her what was going on, and Sarah explained that Danielle had dropped her off an hour ago. My stomach churned. My ex-wife had left our daughter standing on the porch without telling me first. What kind of mother does that? If I had known, I would have come home immediately. The situation only got worse as I ushered Sarah inside and started making dinner. I called Danielle, frustrated, angry, but when she picked up, I could hear a lot of noise in the background. Voices, laughter, the sound of clinking glasses. It hit me. Danielle was out, probably at a bar or some social gathering. She had left Sarah on my porch with no warning, no consideration. I tried to stay calm, but the frustration crept into my voice. Why didn't you tell me before you dropped Sarah off? I asked. Her response shocked me even further. Sarah's your daughter too, she said casually, as if that made it okay. Parenting's a shared responsibility. Her dismissive tone only fueled my anger, but as I listened more, I began to notice something unsettling. There was a slur to her speech. She was drunk. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. She was under the influence. I knew this wasn't the time for a serious conversation. I told Danielle we would talk when I dropped Sarah off the next day. She laughed dismissively and told me to read the note she had given our daughter. Confused, I called for Sarah. I looked at Sarah, puzzled by the note she had handed me. She fumbled through her pockets and pulled out a wrinkled, crumpled piece of paper. As I unfolded it, the message hit me like a ton of bricks. My ex-wife, Danielle, had written that she no longer wanted to care for our daughter. Her reasoning? The child support payments I was providing weren't enough. I stood frozen, a cold wave of disbelief washing over me. How could this be? I was paying a substantial amount each month, and yet she had the audacity to ask for more. By abandoning our child? The feeling of betrayal was overwhelming. But I wasn't about to lose my composure. This wasn't just an emotional reaction. This was about doing what was right for my daughter. I called Child Protection Services and the police, determined to take action. I had CCTV footage that showed Danielle had left Sarah alone on our driveway for over an hour. That was no mistake. This was a dangerous, reckless act. I could feel the urgency in the police's voice as they took my call seriously and promised to handle it immediately. Once the complaint was filed, I called my lawyer. The decision was clear. I was going for full custody. No more tolerance, no more second chances. Danielle had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her put Sarah at risk again. As I discussed this with my lawyer, the reality began to settle in. This was no longer just a broken marriage. This was about protecting my child. A few hours later, Danielle's parents called, shock in their voices. They couldn't believe their daughter had been arrested, and they were desperate for an explanation. I told them everything, laying out how Danielle had endangered Sarah, and they responded with pleading voices. They argued that I was being too harsh, that Danielle was struggling mentally, and that her actions weren't entirely deliberate. But I couldn't let their appeals change my mind. I explained, calmly but firmly, that my daughter's safety had to come first, even if it meant making hard decisions. I told them that the legal action wasn't personal, it was necessary. Danielle had to be held accountable. They proposed alternative solutions, counseling, supervised visitations, but it was too late for that. There was no going back. I told them with a heavy heart that I would be retrieving everything that belonged to Sarah from their house in the next few days. Sarah would stay with me from now on. When I told Sarah the news, I saw the joy light up in her eyes. It was a small but significant moment, and I knew I was making the right decision. She deserved stability, peace, and love, and I was ready to give her all of that. A few weeks later, we found ourselves in court. My lawyer laid out the evidence, Danielle's neglect, her manipulations, and the shocking note she had given to Sarah. We showed the judge the footage of Sarah being left alone, the shabby clothes she had been forced to wear, and the clear pattern of negligence. Danielle's lawyer scrambled to defend her, but the evidence spoke for itself. The judge saw through her attempts to shift the blame and found that the child support I had been paying was being misused. In a decision that stunned me, the judge ruled not only that Danielle would lose custody, but also that she would have to pay a $25,000 penalty for misusing the funds I had given her. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was the validation I needed. My daughter was going to be safe now, and that's all that mattered. Since the court ruling, I felt a peace I hadn't known in a long time. I'm the one taking care of Sarah, and I'm the one making sure she grows up in a loving, secure environment. Of course, Danielle and her family haven't been quiet. They continue to message me, telling me I'm being too harsh, accusing me of destroying Danielle's life. They claim I'm going to ruin Sarah's future, but I refuse to be swayed by their guilt trips. My commitment to my daughter is unwavering, and I will do whatever it takes to make sure she never feels unsafe again. As for Danielle, I don't know what's going on with her. Frankly, I don't want to. One thing I do know is that no matter what she's going through, she shouldn't have taken that drastic step of abandoning our daughter. And for that, she'll face the consequences. A month later, things started to make sense. Mutual friends reached out with startling news. Danielle was 3 months pregnant with Chad's child. Apparently, Chad had begged her not to keep the baby, but she insisted. And when he left her, her erratic behavior began to make sense. It wasn't just about her. It was about her desperation. She was in financial trouble, and her parents couldn't help her. In a twisted turn, she had resorted to selling the new clothes I had bought for Sarah. That's why Sarah had been wearing old, worn-out outfits all this time. Danielle had been lying, telling me they were for special occasions. It was all an attempt to get more money, likely to fund her new life and her second child. But what sickened me most was the cold disregard for our daughter. She had known about her pregnancy and still left Sarah on the doorstep, alone, to go out drinking. It was beyond recklessness. It was beyond irresponsibility. The more I thought about it, the more grateful I became for fighting for full custody. I had no idea what Sarah would have gone through had I not stepped in. I was done letting Danielle put her through any more of this. 6 months have passed, and life has been amazing. Sarah and I have grown even closer. I'm proud of how I'm raising her, and I can honestly say I'm doing the best I can. Danielle has made no attempt to contact us, and I hope it stays that way. As the new year approaches, I'm planning a special surprise for Sarah, a trip to Disneyland. I know how much she loves all the Disney characters, and I can't wait to see the joy on her face when she realizes where we're going. It's moments like these that make everything worth it. Every laugh, every hug, every memory, Sarah is everything to me, and I'll continue to cherish every second we have together.